Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the Archaeologist, now let's get into the travels.
So today we're back in Prague. Last time we were here, we discussed the founding of Prague, the early history, and the new town. Today, I want to talk about the inner city, along with the scientific and religious upheavals that helped shape modern Prague. First off, let's discuss the old town in general. This was the beating heart of Prague, as well as the wider Czech Republic, and as such, not only is there a tight concentration of pubs, clubs, and historic sites, it's also the most expensive area. Food, although there was a wide variety here, tended to be a bit more expensive than in the rest of Prague, and quite a bit more expensive than in the rest of the Czech Republic. Still, there's a lot to immerse yourself in here. It's a gathering place of public opinion, both modern and medieval, and there's even a really fun historical fantasy dinner there which I would highly recommend, especially if, like me, you're a pretty big fantasy nerd. With that out of the way, we'll pick up where I left off last video. Following the death of Charles IV, we see the reign of his son, Sigismund, begin in 1410. Now, like Charles, Sigismund was also the Holy Roman Emperor, as well as King of Bohemia and King of Hungary, and he was important to Prague's development. As the son of Charles, he too took a specific interest in Prague and built the horloge, otherwise known as the Astronomical Clock, which still stands. This is one of Prague's most popular attractions and one of the oldest functioning clocks in the world, erected in 1410, the same year Sigismund's coronation as emperor. It shows not just the time, but also the date and the relative positions of the sun, moon, and zodiac. The square fills up every hour to watch the apostles, added a few hundred years later in the 18th century, march out and bring in the new hour. So behind me is the astronomical clock, and right now we're about 25 minutes away from its next chiming. Now, I've taken the long way around, but for you guys, you get the magic of time-lapse. Ooh. Past me? What are you doing here? Hold on. Is that future me? No, you've gone too far. This is the wrong video. Go back. Looks like I went a little too far. Let's try that again, shall we?
Okay, so what we see here are the outer rings representing ancient Czech numerals, the inner rings giving Roman numerals, and then these various hues of blue and brown represent daily events like sunrise, high noon, and sunset. This figure on the side, representing death, is a skeleton, naturally, and you can tell that this was installed after the plague, because it was after the Black Plague that a lot of these figures became very common. This is the astrolabe here, used for medieval timekeeping and astronomy, with the Earth in the very center. And up here you can see the apostles popping in and out, a call to the city's Catholic origins. And then finally, this spot down here is the calendar dial. It shows the symbol of the old town of Prague, and you can see the current day at the very top, with the months represented by signs of the zodiac.
This is a very good clock for astronomers and astrologers, which shows that Prague was already becoming an intellectual capital. This was indeed the dream of Charles IV, who had reconstructed everything and tried to make Prague the most glorious city in the Holy Roman Empire. And in this, Sigismund shared his vision, and continued flooding the city with new development and funding, attracting artists from all over Europe. He also wanted to make it a religious capital. Another noticeable landmark from this period is the Church of Our Lady before Tyne. Now, this was Old Prague's first church, constructed in the 11th century. It acted as a hospital as well, and was originally built in the Romanesque style. This style still survives in the Ungelt, Prague's original medieval gateway, also in the Old Town. However, its current Gothic form was established in the early 15th century during this phase of construction. This also meant they had little patience for fools, and Europe was about to get very foolish. For complicated reasons we can't really get into in this video, there was, in 1410, 3 different Catholic popes in Europe. It really is a long story, Alright, very quickly, Pope moves to France, then moves back to Italy. France doesn't like this and proclaims a second pope, while a party of cardinals, sick of the whole thing, proclaim a third and making everybody angry. Happy now? Well, Europe wasn't. Anyway, the Holy Roman Empire stepped in, and as was his job, Sigismund held the conference to resolve the matter, and he held this conference in Prague. This was also where a new figure in Bohemian history comes in, Jan Hus. Jan Hus was a Catholic reformer who saw the church as corrupt and in need of serious depoliticization and reformation. Wonder where he got that idea. Anyway, Sigismund invited Jan Hus to this conference to voice his concerns. Hus had been declared a heretic by all three popes, but given that the very nature of this conference was to reform the fractured papal authorities, one can be forgiven for thinking Sigismund's offer of immunity would be honored. That and the fact that the emperor gave you an offer of immunity really should be honored. But it was not. Before even being allowed to attend the conference, Jan Hus was arrested pretty much as soon as he set foot into Prague, and was burned at the stake post-haste. Now, the conference did settle the dispute of the three popes, but the implication of burning Jan Hus, especially without even hearing him out, would bring even more lasting change. This raised the ire of his followers, known as the Hussites, who began a full-scale rebellion. The defenestration of Prague in 1419 saw city officials thrown from windows in the new town hall. And this was the start of a wider rebellion which became known as the Hussite Wars. And what was worse, the Luxembourg dynasty had basically shattered Bohemian trust. Despite the fact Charles and Sigismund had done so much to build Prague, they were unable to control the Bohemian regions ever again. The Hussites eventually split into factions and were put down by 1434, but this was a sign of things to come. Bohemia would become fertile ground for Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation 90 years later. But we can move along a bit to our next major historical figure, Rudolph II. Rudolph II was the first Hapsburg Holy Roman Emperor, and under his reign he took an interest in Prague. Rudolph, despite his very Habsburg-appropriate Catholicism, was rather more enlightened than his later descendants, and still felt the pinch of the Hussite Wars living in Prague Castle. Prague was the capital of the empire again as he moved in, and surrounded himself with both intellectuals and mystics. He significantly rebuilt the castle, especially the Golden Lane, where the guardhouses were added for the Red Artillerymen. However, they still had to buy these dwellings with their own money. Rudolph II is almost the hidden reformer of Prague. Not quite as famous as Charles IV, but he did a lot of reforms for them all the same. He was part of the huge move towards Renaissance thought in the city, and his court included the astronomers Tycho Brahe and Johann Kepler. In 1609, life in the city became a lot easier when Rudolph made the city a safe haven for Protestants, as well as for Jews. There's a lot to say on Prague's Jews, in fact, but we're going to get into that in my third and final video on Prague. Moving on, when Rudolph II passed away, the empire passed to other Hapsburgs until we come to the reign of Ferdinand II. Now, Ferdinand II was a staunch Catholic and in the far more Habsburgy way. This led the Protestant estates to rebel in 1618 when he took over, and there was another defenestration of Catholic officials, and Protestants took over, proclaiming the new King of Bohemia. This led to a war between the Catholic forces of Ferdinand II and the Protestant forces under their new re-elected Protestant King of Bohemia. By 1621, Ferdinand had won and had the 27 leading lords executed. Little known to Ferdinand, however, this was just the beginning. As it turned out, this little rebellion was just the opening salvo in the 30 Years' War, which ravaged Central Europe for, 30 years. When the dust settled, the capital of the empire and the Habsburgs had relocated to Vienna, while Prague shrank to about one-third its pre-war size. Protestantism was outlawed and the Golden Age was over, at least for now. But this was not the end. When the city burned down in 1689, it could rebuild anew, and Prague would once again find itself in the middle of European history. On that note, this is probably a good place to finish the second of my three-part series on Prague. There is a lot more to discuss, particularly about its modern history, and if you don't want to miss Prague's Jewish history in particular,
remember to like and subscribe so you get my latest videos as soon as they come out.
Anyway, thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has been The Travels.